welcome once again to Elevenses. I'm Kevin Williams of Survival Skills Rider Training, and this is my twice weekly webcast, which usually goes out live. And fortunately, I'm live today, and we all seem to be up and running, which is good news because the broadband was off till first thing this morning. So what have we got for you today? Another packed show. It's show number 325. It's the 16th of April. And we will be looking at the news that no new smart motorways are to be built, which is, I think, good news. Paris is to ban cross-city traffic. Tourist motorbike rentals are being targeted now in Phuket. Bike thefts have soared in a tiny Pacific Island state. And over in the Singapore, learner riders are to be given an AI trial, which they organisers say will give them better feedback. And Husqvarna have released or will be releasing a pair of KTM 890 engined bikes to top their range. I'll have a look at those. There's also a photo doing the rounds on social media of a new electric Royal Enfield, and that has prompted talks of a 2024 release. I put 2014 there. I don't know what I was thinking at that point. And finally, we'll have a look at the history of Husqvarna to round off the show today, because it is quite an interesting company actually. So Richard's looked in. Good morning. Nice to see you. So that's what we have lined up for you today. So stay with me for the next 30 odd minutes as I take you through all that. Now, first things first, just a quick reminder. We do have a talk coming up on Wednesday with a bit of fair wind and some luck. The second of the two talks on sports psychology that I was planning should actually be going ahead on Wednesday the 19th. As I said, I was in some doubt that would happen even this week after the broadband went down last week and wasn't fixed till this morning. So that is how basically we'll be looking at the science which underpins a lot of sporting activity these days. It's been around for years. I mean, sports psychology dates back from the 1950s, but it's something that most cyclists don't seem to be aware of. But of course, if motorcycling can be considered a sport, then we can use sports psychology. So the science really, one thing I think it can do really well is to help us put our race face on, so to speak. And I'll show you some simple tricks we can all use to get ourselves ready to head out on the road in the right frame of mind. And we'll also have a look at some of the traps that can lead us to riding distracted. So if you haven't already signed up for that, do so please, if you feel that you'd like to be interested in that particular show. As always, the link to that to get tickets is via my Tiny HQ site, and I'll just put the link up for all to see. There it is. Do pop over there, have a look, and if you're interested, do sign up. Okay, so what else to say? That's the show. So on with the news, basically, from around the world of motorcycling. Now, the big story from the UK, of course, is that the government announced yesterday that no new smart motorways will be built. And that's a picture of the existing smart motorway network. Now, 14 planned stretches. These are shown in red on the map, so you can see where they are. Bit of the M4, bit of the M1, part of the M6, and there's also a stretch down there, I think it's the M27 along the coast, isn't it, and the M3 which leads down to it, towards Southampton. Those will now not happen. So that's 11 stretches which were already paused, and 3 more which were earmarked for conversion are all now cancelled. Now, the reason for this is said to be due to financial pressures. The construction of these schemes would have cost more than £1 billion, plus a lack of public trust in the road system. Now, a cynic might well say that it's a popular vote moving winning move for the Tory party, Rishi Sunak in particular, who included it as one of his manifesto promises. And he's certainly clearly happy to accept responsibility for this cancellation. Now, the little bit of history, the first all-lane running motorway where the hard shoulder was removed and converted to a live lane, it was introduced as a trial on the M42 as far back as 2006. So we've had them for quite a long while. And the idea basically was to create extra capacity on the road without a necessary land grab to extend the motorway sideways. Now, the trial was seen as a success, and so all lane running was extended onto key parts of the road network, but there were significant downgrades from the original trial specification. For example, the refuges for stopped vehicles were no longer regularly spaced as they had been on the trial, and they were much further apart, at least twice, sometimes even 3 times as apart. And you really had no idea where the next refuge was on a lot of the stretches. And the new roads have proven highly controversial ever since. Now, the removal of the normal hard shoulder, the lane to the near side which is normally restricted to emergency use, means that vehicles that come to a halt are often stopped in a live running lane. And of course, it also makes it difficult for emergency services vehicles to actually get to the scene of a breakdown or a crash. Now, although National Highways claim that with stopped vehicle technology it takes an average of 1 minute to close the lane, audits have shown much longer times before approaching motorists are warned. I think 8 minutes was mentioned on a BBC programme recently. Now, the combination of the lack of a hard shoulder and the repeated failure of the warning systems to operate in time has been blamed for causing the deaths of motorists who run into difficulties. So back in January 2022, the government paused the expansion of motorways where the hard shoulder is used as a permanent live running lane in order that 5 years of data could be assessed to decide whether they were safe. Now, to my knowledge, the results of that study are not yet available, but campaigners say that 75 lives have been lost on smart motorways. And the Transport Select Committee said after an in-depth study they had serious worries about the risks they pose. Now, the other people at the sharp end really are the coroners, and several of those have requested a review of the policy. And only 10 days ago, reported on my show here, a coroner said during an inquest that a crash which left 2 pensioners dead would not have happened had there been a hard shoulder. And all this must have placed further pressure on the Department for Transport, which has continued to insist that smart motorways are safer than conventional motorways with a hard shoulder. I also highlighted a BBC report from a journalist who'd gone undercover into a smart motorway control room and found non-functioning safety systems and staffing issues. So, where does that leave us? Well, apart from the cancellation, the construction of 2 stretches of smart motorways, that's junctions 6 to 8 of the M56 and 21A to 26 of the M6, they will continue because they are more than 3/4 complete. That was confirmed by the Department for Transport. So the existing stretches of smart motorway, they make up around 10% of England's motorway network. They will undergo a safety refit, which will add 150 extra emergency stopping places across the network. And that is in addition to the recent installation of stop vehicle detection systems on all smart motorway stretches, something that was originally left out of many of the conversions. Now, presumably on other stretches where conversion to all-lane running had begun, the original hard shoulder will be reinstated and then the works will be removed. Now, campaigners who have lost loved ones on crashes on these roads have welcomed the move, but they say their job will not be complete until all smart motorways are rolled back to the original hard shoulder format. Liz Truss incidentally had vowed to scrap all smart motorways, but right now the government says that won't happen. The budget saving will be significant at a time when costs to finish constructing these roads would only have increased due to inflation. Whether the cash saved will be ring-fenced and used for road repairs elsewhere on the network hasn't been stated, but somehow I doubt it will happen that way. And another question that really does have to be asked in the fallout from all this is just how much more cash will have to be spent to improve safety on these existing smart motorways, and how much has already been spent over and above the original budget by upgrading their safety systems with the stop vehicle detection system, which should have been in place right from the start, plus the CCTV systems that were missing too. They should all have been in the original design. It'll be interesting to see how much that costs. I suspect the audit of the true costs will show very, very significant overruns. Right, okay. So we have Richard, Christine looking in, Sue's here as well. Nice to see you all. Thank you very much indeed for coming along this morning. I hope you enjoyed today's show. Right, okay, let's switch countries. Let's head over to Paris. And from next year, the date has not yet been set in stone, but it is next year sometime. Riders and drivers in Paris will face the imposition of a limited traffic zone, a zone à trafic limité, or ZTL. That'll cover the centre of the city as well as part of the left bank of the Seine. Now, whilst walking, cycling and the use of public transport are all going to be encouraged, it's the usual story. Private cars and motorcycles are going to face restrictions on their use. Now, drivers and riders who live or work in the area will still be able to commute into or across the zone if they display a permit. No word on what that'll cost, but I can't imagine it will be free. But it's estimated that only 30% of the traffic that currently passes through the city centre actually needs to be there. So the new restrictions basically will affect through traffic and are expected, as usual, to reduce both air and noise pollution, though I note the ban also applies to electric vehicles, not just ICE vehicles. Enforcement, how will they do that? Well, apparently it will be at random checks at the exits to the zone, so they won't check you on the way in, they'll check you on the way out. As I say, details not yet set, but you can find the plans on the official Paris City website. Right, what's Paul got to say? Hello Paul, good morning to you too. To improve capacity on motorways, enforcement of the keep left unless overtaking rule might help, although that would of course increase the number of vehicles occupying the controversial lane 1 of smart motorways unless and until they are reversed to 3 lanes. Absolutely, and another easy step that would take the throughput of motorways significant improvement would be to restrict lorries to the near side 2 lanes. I think it's bonkers when you end up with 3 lorries all playing lorry tag, driving along at the same top speed on their speed limiter, side by side occupying 3 of the 4 lanes because legally they are allowed to do so, squeezing everything else into a single lane. And the other restriction I would bring in would be lorries to the near side lane only on 2 lane stretches and 3 lane stretches when there is congestion. It wouldn't be difficult to implement. They've got the signs up on most of these stretches. It would be easy peasy. It would improve the flow of other vehicles. It wouldn't significantly delay most lorries. That if they could reverse the 50-mile-per-hour speed limit on, or minimise the restrictions that some lorry companies have fitted, reverse that, make sure they can do 60 miles an hour, then everybody can trundle along at the same 60, and it would improve matters enormously in terms of throughput on busy roads. It's done in other countries. There are roads in France, for example, where lorries are restricted to the near side in busy hours. There are easy ways to improve throughput which don't involve making motorways more dangerous. Right, okay, so don't forget you are watching Elevenses. I'm Kevin Williams of Survival Skills, and do set yourself a reminder. These shows go out at 11 on Wednesdays and Sundays, almost always live, occasionally recorded, very, very rarely I actually have to miss a show due to other commitments, but you can find all the old shows on my YouTube channel, which is Survival Skills UK. Don't forget the all-important UK on the end. If you do, you won't find me. You'll find somebody sharpening Boy Scouts with horses' hooves or something similar like to that. Right, so okay, on with some more news. Now, as you know, I've been reporting regularly about the theft of motorcycles and how it's a real problem for bikers. And in one place, the rate of motorcycle theft over the first 3 months of 2023 has more than doubled over the same period last year, which potentially brings an end to a 5-year downward trend of bike theft. Now, where is this happening? Well, the answer is it's the Cook Islands, the tiny island state in the South Pacific, where I managed to get a few days holiday myself at the end of my New Zealand Shiny Side Up work trip back in 2019. Took a few days holiday there. And astonishingly, the police have said that 22 locally owned motorcycles were reported stolen between January and March of this year. That's 144% rise on the first quarter of 2022 and 100% rise on 2021. So police have apparently given what they call timely advice for owners to exercise more care about the safety of their vehicles, in particular not to leave vehicles unattended with the key in the ignition, even at home during the night, which says something about the sort of approach to security in the Cook Islands, really, doesn't it? Motorbike owners should be more aware about leaving their vehicles, especially overnight, in vulnerable locations or risk areas in town. Given the town, you can walk across it in 5 minutes. I'm interested to know which is the risk area. But in a pattern which is familiar from the UK, these cases of motorcycle theft are often opportunist. The owners has left the key in ignition and parked outside a nightclub, they've said, or left in an unlit area of town. Now, on average, about half the missing bikes are recovered, and this is really the sort of puzzle, really. Because where on earth do the bikes go outside of the main islands? It's a bit of a mystery where the other half are. The largest island, Rarotonga, is only 26 square kilometres inside, and it's home to just 13,000 people. So where are those missing bikes going? Are they being shipped off to even smaller islands or what? I have no idea. I must admit I would love to know the answer to that particular question. Okay, so I'm always interested in stories about motorcycle training and to know what kind of steps riders have to take to get a license abroad. Now, in Singapore, to get what's called a Class 2B license, which allows you to ride a motorcycle up to 200cc on public roads, if I've read the rather confusing advice on the various websites correctly, you must first pass the basic theory test, then apply for a provisional driving license, and that would allow you to practice riding around a set circuit on a driving school premises, but also to ride out on the public road whilst supervised by a driving school instructor. Now, the interesting thing here is that one of the 3 schools in Singapore that actually offers rider training, they say that their learners can now get, quote, more detailed feedback and precise evaluation via a system tapping artificial intelligence. And this system is on trial at the Comfort Del Gro Driving Centre, and it's the creation of a local company called Wire Technologies. And so this is a picture of what goes on out in Singapore. There you go, that's a bike ready to go out, and that appears to be the training circuit behind it. Now, the tool is said to be designed to automate the current manual training processes and personalise the learning journey. I'm kind of puzzled over how you personalise something with an app, but hey ho. The system allows attendance to be taken automatically. I'm not quite sure what that means. Possibly it means without direct supervision. Probably there will be somebody supervising the general area, but maybe not watching and standing next to you. And basically the bikes are fitted with sensors and a video camera. And so as the rider navigates through the circuit, they have to deal with challenges which include obstacles which have the wonderful names of the plank, the slalom, and the one that really made me intrigued was something called the crank course. I've no idea what that is. Maybe it just implies you have to be mad to ride a motorcycle. Who knows? Anyway, the bike collects the data, calculates an overall score on your performance, and whether you've received any demerit points. And presumably you get those for doing things like wandering out of the marked off area or knocking cones over, very much like our Mod 1 bike test. And then that is all fed to a phone app, and that allows the learner to access that information directly. They can see specific mistakes where they've been made on the course, and they also get the video footage from the bike so they can see the areas which need improvement. Now, the data is also said to be made available to the instructors, who can go through the details with the students. Now, the Chief Executive Vincent Tan of the training school itself, he said that learners under human supervision were often given feedback where they were unable to visualize their mistakes at the end of the lessons or later recall the feedback, and I would certainly concur with that. Sometimes I will talk about something that has happened to a trainee, even literally just a minute or two earlier, and they simply don't recognize what I'm talking about. And certainly I have given people feedback on training courses, and they've sworn blind later on that I didn't say any such thing, which is why I tended to use written feedback very much. Mr. Tan said the instructors have also pointed out that they have a challenge to supervise a class which can be up to 6 students, and I would also agree with that. We have a limit of 4 on CBTs in the UK, and even that is dependent on the size of the training area available. And of course, once you're out on the road, it's a maximum of 2 to 1 for CBTs and direct access. So the with the no physical record or evidence of riding performance, Mr. Tan said instructors have to rely on memory or written notes for post-lesson reviews. Well, yes, okay, you can take notes. Nothing wrong with that. And we do develop pretty good memories as well for recalling exactly what went on those rides. But he added, rather alarmingly, since he's the guy who seems to run the training school involved, that the instructor's assessment might not be accurate or objective. Well, you know, speaking as an instructor, you try to be as accurate as possible. You try to be as objective as possible. Yes, everybody does make mistakes, but I'm not entirely sure that replacing the personalised touch from a trainer with an app is actually the way forward. Now, according to Wire Technologies, the new system helps instructors identify improvement areas for students, whilst forming a more standardised and objective evaluation process by reducing subjective or ambiguous input that may arise due to human error. And frankly, I think that is talking the app up at the expense of the instructors who do, you know, I know from experience here in the UK that they'll be doing a pretty tough, pretty high pressure job, and they'll be doing it to the best of their ability. Mr. Tan said the new system will help people learn faster and better, which again, I'm not entirely convinced about. You have to interpret what the app tells you. The advantage of working with a person rather than an app is that the person can explain if you don't understand what you've been told initially. You can go into more detail, you can use examples, analogies, you can, all the standard teaching tools. An app cannot do that. Yes, it can take some shortcuts, but I'm not convinced that it'll work better. I'd also argue that it's not artificial intelligence either. It's just a basic marking system and a camera. And frankly, I use cameras to film trainees and to give them feedback, so I'm really not convinced it's quite what is being written on the box for that particular initiative. I'd be interested to hear what you think, actually, if you've got any comments about whether you would like to be assessed by a sort of sensors on the bike, and whether you'd prefer that to direct input from a trainer. Drop me a line if you have views either way on that. All right, okay. So, some motorbikes. Well, a new pair of road bikes under the Svartpillen 901 and Vitpillen 901 names have been caught out on the road in the usual spy shots that I tend to assume are usually leaked to the press. In this case, I'd say that it's highly likely the bike is due to appear because the machine does look almost finished. You can find the photos on the MCN website if you want to go and have a look at them incidentally. The passenger accommodation does appear to be slightly more functional than on the preceding bikes. I'll talk about Husqvarna in a little bit more detail in a moment. And something I did notice, which makes the bike look a lot nicer, is that there is a tail-hung splash guard number plate holder. Rather than the sort of rather hideous swing arm mounted affair that was fitted to earlier bikes. BMW were guilty of that years ago, and they're ghastly looking things. The machines though clearly share the same design cues as the smaller capacity Husqvarna bikes we've already seen. Now the big change is shifting up to the 899 twin cylinder engine that's found on the KTM 890 Duke. Now it's not surprising since the owners of KTM, Pira Mobility, also own the Husky brand and have previously used KTM technology in their earlier machines, and I'll come on to that at the end of the show and have a look at their history in a little bit more detail. Now, having dropped the previous 690 Duke engine at 701, Husqvarna have been in need of a sort of a road-going range topper, so it's likely the new bikes will produce the same 120 odd horsepower as a KTM, and they'll sit alongside the 890 Adventure derived Norden 901 in the range. And given the closer links between the KTMs and the Huskies, it's near certain they'll also get the sort of standard KTM electronics, which means you get ABS, ride modes, wheelie control, traction control, and a bi-directional quick shifter. The Vitpillen comes with lower bars than the Svartpillen. That seems to be the big difference, by the way. These are likely to launch, and I've written 2014 again, I'm a decade behind myself, 224, likely to be out next year, which means they'll probably appear in the flesh in time for the autumn round of bike shows. But I would expect a significant price premium over the KTMs. Okay, looking at another motorcycle, Royal Enfield. Now, back in 2020, Siddhartha Lal, who's the MD of Eicher Motor, who's the umbrella company that owns Royal Enfield, he said, the way we're working on EVs is that we're not going to be the first to the market, but rather we'd study the market and understand the technology. You'll certainly see stuff from us like concept bikes and prototypes, but you're not going to see a production EV from us for at least another 3 years or so. It might be longer. Now, back in January this year, the company acquired a 10% share in Stark Varg for 50 million euros, something I reported here at the time. That's a company that's been making an electric motocross machine, and their specs are impressive. The bike has an equivalent 80 horsepower performance, so no slug. It's an impressive 6 hours of runtime, although again no exact word on exactly how fast the bike is travelling over that time, and a recharge time of 1 to 2 hours. Now, the collaborative research and development deal was immediately seen as a move to help speed along Royal Enfield's own development of their electric motorcycles. So, what came about? Well, let's have a quick look at what we might have seen. This is the, just get it up on screen, this is the supposed photograph of the electric Royal Enfield that's currently out on social media. It's clearly a render and not a photo, but it's being accompanied by statements which say that the Indian manufacturer actually plans to launch an electric motorcycle within the next 12 months. And according to the rumour mill, this new machine, which is apparently called the L1C, is expected to arrive in 2025 with initial volume of 5,000 units a year. Now, the interesting thing is, of course, the L1C isn't actually the first electric bike that we've seen from Royal Enfield. This is the Royal Enfield Electric with a K, 01 concept bike, and this appeared in November on a Scoop. You can see the Scoop Auto car on the logo there, and it had a very unique front end. If I kind of zoom in on it, you can see that it's a sort of wishbone affair with a pivoting link up near the headstock. It's a very interesting looking design indeed. Now, some reports say that the rather ugly LC1, the bike we saw a moment ago, will appear as soon as next year. There's no word on whether this particular Electric 01 is going to appear. So whether we see this sort of futuristic design, or rather that interesting frame wrapped around the sort of tank there, I think that's quite an interesting looking motorcycle. The other one I think is bloody hideous, but there we go. No word from the company, so whether we will see either, both, or neither is still entirely open to debate. So, alright, on to the final bit of the show then. I'm going to have a look at Husqvarna in a little bit more detail, because I think the stories about the two new bikes are quite interesting. Now, who are Husqvarna exactly? Well, they're nominally Swedish. They're owned by the same holding company as KTM. They're officially built in Austria, and most parts are actually manufactured in India. So in their attempts to sort of build a world-spanning empire, Pira Mobility, the group that owns KTM, they seem to have been struggling, to me at least, to make sense of what to do with the Husqvarna brand name. Now, Husqvarna go back into the ancient history. It was originally a metalworking company founded all the way back in 1689 in the Swedish town of Husqvarna. That's spelled with a K, not a Q. And their sort of job description was producing muskets for the Swedish army. Now, they began production of motorcycles in 1903 when they produced their first motorized bicycle, and during the 20s and 30s they built competitive street machines. They entered road racing events, including the Isle of Man TT. Now, having established themselves in Europe with these bikes, Husqvarna became associated with off-road sport too via their high-performance two-stroke and four-stroke engines, and they won 5 FIM World Championships during the 1960s. And intriguingly, amongst the riders associated with Husqvarna was the Hollywood actor and the more than capable off-road rider Steve McQueen. He competed, if I remember correctly, for the US International 6-day trial team one year, so he was pretty hot off-road. Now, what happened to Husqvarna after that? They were acquired by Electrolux in 1977. That was a fact new to me. Electrolux I tend to associate with refrigerators, but they still continued to build lightweight, high-performance motors. But the company's fortunes did take something of a downturn in 1987 when Husqvarna Motorcycles was bought by Cagiva MV Agusta, the Italian company. And what was announced was that they were going to relocate the Husqvarna brand to Italy, and that caused something of a rebellion. So the core Husky development team actually all resigned, and they set up a new Swedish company called Husaberg the following year. Now, my only personal experience of the Husqvarna brand came around 1999, I think it was. My brother bought a 610 TE. It was a sort of road legal enduro bike. I remember the endearing features were the fact that it did have mirrors, but they had to be sort of fixed with a clamp to the handlebars because there were no mirror fittings on the bars, and the twin high-level exhausts were too close together to actually get a UK number plate in the middle, so it had to have an illegal number plate just to fit between the pipes. It was an absolute hoot to ride. The engine was remarkably powerful and strong for its 600cc size. It was quite scary to ride off-road. It was far more capable than I was, and I could get up to some silly speeds, and really the bike was in control and I wasn't. But it was a bit of a laugh to ride, but it did need a lot of TLC. They had no oil pump, and relied entirely on splash lubrication to the top end, so oil changes basically every time you rode it. Anyway, Husky were then briefly owned by the BMW group at the time when BMW were starting to buy up motorcycles for some bizarre reason. They were sold almost immediately to Pira Mobility in 2013, who incidentally had already acquired the Husaberg brand. Now, under Pira, a supermoto appeared in 2015. Then, despite the long off-road sporting pedigree, Pira made the somewhat odd decision to reintroduce street motorcycles under the Husqvarna name. So the first bike to appear was the 410. Let me get the picture up on screen. There it is. That's the Vit Pillen 401, a real street concept bike. It appeared at the 2014 Milan show. Now, it was built around the Indian-made 375 KTM single, and it also shared the KTM 390 Duke's chassis, brakes, white power suspension, most of the exhaust system, and its ride-by-wire throttle system. They were claimed at the time to have quote, pure and progressive styling cues from the future. They were said to have minimalism combined with sophistication and sleek and aggressive bodywork, forming clean lines from what was called a unique single element body panel. Now, as far as I can tell, the Vit Pillens came with flat bars. The Svart Pillens came with a slightly higher upright riding position, and as far as I can tell, apart from the colour, that was the only difference. In case you're wondering, Vit Pillen means white arrow, Svart Pillen means black arrow. Now, they were also billed as being assembled in Austria, whereas the 390 KTMs were built in India by Bajaj. Though, of course, all the shared parts were actually made in India and shipped over to Austria. Now, if the industry was abuzz to see some bonkers design, that's the Svart Pillen, the black one. To quote one gushing article written at the time, the bikes didn't really seem to strike much of a chord with riders who'd actually be using them on the roads. When they finally arrived 4 years after the concept bike was first shown off. I don't know, perhaps because the sort of natural environment for a lightweight naked single with a top speed of around 100 miles an hour is probably urban streets, and you know, for that riding, the skinny seat, the low bars, the rear set pegs don't make a great deal of sense. And I would suspect the other factor was that they were 25% more than the budget KTMs with which they competed. And frankly, some of the more honest reviews online suggest they were just as uncomfortable to ride as they looked. A lot of fingers pointing at that rather skinny and unpadded seat. So, what else? Well, I've only ever seen a couple of those bikes, even living here in Hipster Central in London. 200 and 250 versions were then launched in India, Southeast Asia and Latin America in what Pira themselves said was, quote, a bid to bolster sales and further grow the brand. Now, the next bike that was supposed to make a big impact were the Svart Pillen and Vit Pillen 701 singles. They were built around the KTM 690 single-cylinder motor and used the trellis frame, same alloy swinging arm, the same inverted white power telescopic front forks, and the same Brembo braking systems. Now, in theory, again, a punchy 693cc single, putting out 74 horses and 53 pound-feet of torque, should have been a heap of fun. Particularly as it was combined with a 170 kilogram, just 370 pounds of motorcycle. But if they made a big impact with the press, again they flopped in sales terms. They appeared in the catalogue in 2018 and I can't say I've ever seen one on the streets. I'm sure the other factor here, apart from the cost, of the tubed wheels. bringing back blowouts for a street bike really isn't a forward-thinking step, frankly. Tubeless rims, rim-laced wheels are freely available. Anyway, they vanished from the catalogue after less than 2 years, I think, on sale. They don't even rate a mention on Husqvarna's 120th anniversary timeline. It's Husky's 120th year of producing bikes this year. So it seems that Husqvarna have gone back to raiding the KTM engine warehouse, and the twin-cylinder Norden 901 that appeared to exploit the what they consider the growing adventure travel market in 2001, and there's an even better equipped Norden 901 Expedition that was released this year. And as we said at the top of the show, that brings me up to date with the history of Husqvarna for now. Where they go in the future, I don't know. If they do sell in any numbers anywhere in the world, I don't know. Personally, I think the styling is a bit too radical for most people, and the size of the pillion seat, of course, means that they really are bikes for one person, and then it comes down to being a bike for one person with a tough backside. Right, that is it for today's show. Thank you very much again for tuning in. As just a reminder, there is the talk on Wednesday evening at 8 PM. Do pop along for that. It's all about sports psychology, and we can use that to improve our motorcycling. And then the next show, I should be back on Wednesday, and hopefully no broadband problems. Richard's just given me a thumbs up, which is good. Thank you all very much for looking in. If you are out there on the bike today, it looks like a nice warm dry day down here in London. The weather forecast for the next few days is looking middling. I think tomorrow is wet. Tuesday doesn't look too bad. Temperatures are gradually beginning to climb. It's been a miserable March and April so far. So hopefully we are getting something like spring on the way. So once again, thank you very much indeed for your time. I do hope you've enjoyed the show. Feedback, of course, let me know how you've enjoyed it. I'm always happy to hear that. And if you are out there on your bikes today, stay shiny side up.